The CoinDesk Spotlight is brought to you by Nexo, the place to earn on Bitcoin, Ethereum, and more.
Welcome back. A new Bitcoin improvement proposal, BIP119, is causing controversy in the Bitcoin community. It proposes to place conditions on Bitcoin transactions, and it has a lot of pros and cons. For one, developer Jeremy Rubin, who has proposed the soft fork, says it will help with decentralization, scaling, self-custody, and privacy. But other prominent Bitcoin advocates like Andreas Antonopoulos say it could have the unintended consequences of limiting Bitcoin's fungibility and effectively killing Bitcoin. Others raise concerns with the speed by which the proposal requested activation by consensus. Blockstream CEO Adam Back saying concretely proposing to activate anything on Bitcoin without technical and ecosystem consensus is de facto an attack on Bitcoin's change process that protects immutability and security. The anti-fragility is people who defend those principles. All right, joining us now to discuss is Jeremy Rubin, the founder of Bitcoin researcher Judica and the developer behind BIP119. Hi, Jeremy. Thanks for joining us. So you created BIP119, and you're the best person to describe what's it all about. What's the pitch here?
So fundamentally, the pitch is adding a little bit more ability to do smart contracts in Bitcoin, and checking out some of the really fantastic use cases that would enable in terms of self-custody, scalability, privacy, and decentralization. This is something that's been kicking around the research community for some time, but people were very concerned about the extent to what might be capable. BIP119 is a very limited form of that is relatively technically uncontroversial. And we can talk about what that means.
All right. So smart contract features like Ethereum tell me a bit, how controversial is that even to discuss in the community?
So we're not really trying to go for like Ethereum. We're trying to go for things that help Bitcoin users do what they're already trying to do today, but do it more successfully. So an example that I like to give of this is vaults, where you could add a little bit better wallet security for users by having a smart contract that limits you when you go to spend, that you set up for yourself. That gives you time to be able to prevent a hacker from stealing your money. That's something that I think is in line with Bitcoin's principles and is not sort of the DeFi, degen, NFT angle that people are really riled up about in Ethereum.
Yeah, and I suppose the controversy lies in what Andreas Antonopoulos said, is that it could kill Bitcoin, and there could be these unintended consequences of governments being able to come in and put restrictions into Bitcoin. So is that the case?
That's a little bit of a preposterous case that he's making. It is the case if you added those things to Bitcoin, maybe explicitly, you'd have that risk. But check template verify BIP119 was actually designed to route around all of those possibilities. And the reality is that if you were trying to implement those things, even with BIP119 available, you would do it in a very different way using some of the existing features of Bitcoin. The way that Bitcoin resists those types of attacks on Bitcoin's self-sovereignty is at the social layer, not necessarily at the technical layer.
Okay. Another point of contention was the speed with which this activation request is happening. And so I wonder, what were your thoughts on that? I mean, decentralized consensus is tough enough, so this is kind of an added layer.
Yeah, so I think people have really misinterpreted what I put out. What I did say was that I had prepared a client, and the metaphor I like to use is it's a little bit like a game of tennis. And I was really getting to the ball, and I offered the community the ability to decide to swing or not swing on if this feature should activate. And I actually implemented both the code to activate and block the activation of this new feature, so the community could really decide if this was the right thing for Bitcoin. Where it's been misinterpreted is people reading it as I was trying to explicitly force this feature to be turned on, which was not my intent, nor what my actions pointed as.
Mm-hmm. Do you think that your proposal would have gotten less criticism if you were more of an insider, like Peter Wheeler or another Bitcoin developer?
I'm not sure. I mean, I think that some of these developers have a really tremendous platform and track record, and that speaks volumes to why they may, seem to have had an easier time advocating for their changes. The reality is that I've been a Bitcoin developer, at least since 2016, and been involved in the community since 2013 or so. So I'm not quite an outsider to Bitcoin, and I think a lot of it is that in the technical community, people actually are a little bit more on the side of wanting to add features that would rival Ethereum more directly, and they're trying to figure out how to do that safely. And so that's a little bit of the tension that I think people don't necessarily see, is that BIP119 is a very conservative proposal, and developers are trying to figure out how they could do something a little bit more aggressively.
Mm-hmm. Do you have a sense of how much support in the community you have for this proposal?
So for the proposal itself, I think that there is a considerable amount of support. At least among the technical audience, people understand what it does, understand the properties of why it might be safe. Where there is question among some of the other developers is if it's useful enough. And that's sort of where it points to maybe adding more functionality. But I do have a website, utxos.org/signals, which has like more than 100 different people and organizations in the Bitcoin community who have all indicated interest in having the check template verify functionality available because they have things that they would like to build using it. And so at least from my perspective, there is sufficient demand for it to be useful for Bitcoin to have this.
Interesting. So I'm just curious, how often do we see BIPs being created, and what's next?
Yeah, so a BIP is really something that anybody can make and get a number assigned for. It's no endorsement of any sort of quality or anything. People make BIPs for things that are pretty inadvisable all the time. It's just a way of tracking the progress of it. But in terms of consensus upgrades, we don't see them all too often just because they're a lot more difficult to do. But people kick around ideas for years, and then at a certain point, they propose that they should be included. And that's what we've seen historically across a number of the upgrades that have been included as consensus upgrades to Bitcoin.
Mm-hmm. And so I guess what's next for your proposal? Like when is the deadline, if you will?
So I didn't put out any deadline. I just put a proposal out of saying, if people would like to have this functionality available later this year, here are the actions that they could take to see that happen. The feedback that I've received somewhat broadly is that might be premature. And what I'm trying to do is help people establish a little bit more of a timeline around how we might weigh and evaluate alternatives or pathways for delivering this functionality, evaluations that people might want to do of this technology, and hoping to be able to put that on track for next year or for other proposals that might be delivering more of the functionality that people are looking for.
And just lastly, Jeremy, maybe you can just comment on how the decentralized nature of Bitcoin makes decision-making often very difficult. And what do you think of the slow slog?
So what I really like to remind people is this is the work. We are trying to build sort of the first ever decentralized system of this nature. And there are a lot of things that we don't have perfect answers to. Development process around how Bitcoin improvement proposals to consensus proceed is something that I think is relatively undefined or difficult to define. And some people view that difficulty in defining it as a feature, not a bug, because they think it makes it harder to corrupt. My personal feeling is that if these undefined processes sort of rule the day, that actually leads to more corruption and lower quality results. So overall, what I kind of remind people is that Bitcoin developers might be disagreeing about how we get there, but we all agree about where we're trying to go. And we're kind of like a big dysfunctional family. We're still family at the end of the day.